if somebody jumps in. This is the Happy House Hunters group, and I just want to say welcome to everybody. Andora and I are going to tag team the call today, and we've got a couple of listeners joining in, and then of course this is all going to get recorded and put out there for our replays, which we were just having a chat about. With the Happy House Hunters, we go through the 6 F's of real estate twice a year. We talk about how to find it, how to fund it, then finally how to fix it, which is our topic today, is fixing it. So Deepak, you're on the right one because you're just getting ready to buy your first one. So we're going to talk about fixing today. You get to see some pictures in real time on what Andora and I have just recently been through. We're kind of cohorts in crime. We tag team conversations. She's part of my advisory board. I'm part of her advisory board, and we kind of bounce ideas off of each other when it comes to every facet of the Happy House Hunters: the finding, the funding, the fixing. And then finally, are you going to flip that property or are you going to fill it? And then once you decide that, how many do you have to do to have your freedom number? In other words, how many of these do you have to either flip or fill to make that day job optional? Doesn't mean you have to make the day job optional. It just means you have the option to make the day job optional. So I love that. And I did both for many years, as did Andora. So a little bit of background about me. I started when I was in my early 40s. I invested in my first piece of real estate. And I take that back. Back in my late teens, early 20s, I bought a mobile home. And I was pretty darn proud of myself that I could even do that as a young person. And then over the, I got married, and together, my then husband, Dan, and I, we bought our first house. And then when, 10 years later, when we went through our divorce, I voluntarily let him keep the house, because at that point, this was the big thing. And if any of the gals are listening, you'll get it, or some of the guys that aren't handy will get it. I didn't know how I was going to fix it if something happened. I didn't know how to take care of a house. Dan had some of that skill set, and I thought, I don't even know where to turn the darn water off if I get a water leak. And so, and he did show me a few things. But again, I had that fear, and I said, no, I don't want to keep the house. You can have the house in the divorce, because I don't know how to fix it if something breaks. I'd rather just rent. What was I thinking? But you know what? It's where I was at the time. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s and I knew that the only way I was going to get to retire was to start creating some sort of income that would basically grow on its own without me having to work for it by the hour. Because I thought, I'm working 2 jobs, a little over minimum wage, and I'm paying the bills and I'm doing okay. But how am I going to continue to pay the bills, do okay, and still save up enough money for when I was in my 60s and 70s and 80s that would continue to support me when I wasn't working by the hour? And so I had a huge decision to make. And finally, in my early 40s, I made the decision. And I looked myself in the mirror, and Andora, you'll get this. And I said, I am smart enough to figure this out. Whatever it takes. I am smart enough to figure this out. People have figured this out all over the world, and I don't need to be the only one that doesn't have this figured out. I need to figure this out. And that's when I got very serious about how and what out there would generate income while I was sleeping. And the only thing that I could come up with that I felt that I could wrap my mind around was purchasing real estate and having and holding it, being a buy and hold investor, where I could purchase this real estate, I could rent it out, and folks would continue to pay me rent. And at some magical year, it would be paid off. And then that would become my income, that money coming in, because I knew over the years that rent would go up. And so that's how I got started. But I was a late bloomer. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. Since then, I have retired from all my corporate jobs over the years, and I just now do the real estate. And I have the Kathy Benner International Academy, where I help folks come up with whatever works for them as passive income. So you see in my little Hollywood square here that I am a passive income mentor. And I prefer to mentor more than coach. So I limit my coaching clients. I only have about 5 coaching clients a month that I actually coach. And I work with them, do a deep dive. And the rest of the Academy members, I am open to mentoring them on a daily basis. I have daily office hours. I have strategy call sessions that are free. And most of what I do is at no charge. And so I invite you to jump on board under kathybinner.com and check all that out. So I am going to now go over to Andora. Andora, tell us just briefly, like I did, when you got started and what your scenario was. And then Andora and I are going to share, we're going to talk about our first, and I'll call them flips. It doesn't necessarily mean that we sold them after we got them rehabbed, but the proper term, I suppose I should change that, is our first rehabs, because we're both buy and hold investors, and then our latest rehab. So Andora, give us a little bit of your background.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. So yes, I'm Andora Marshall, and I actually started out in my early 20s. I kind of just fell into it. My mother had passed away and she owned her mother's home. And rather than to leave it to my father, she's like, you know what? I'm going to leave it to my 3 children. So it was in Athens, Ohio, and we did Section 8. And all of us lived, like one of us lived in Somerset, one in Thornville, and I lived in Columbus. So as you can imagine, Athens is a good distance away, about an hour away from all of us. So we definitely learned how to be handy, and really how to kind of work together as a team. And then once since 1989 is when we acquired that house. And then in 1990, I bought my own first home. And I thought, you know what, I can do this if I can. So that's kind of how I got started. And I'll be honest, when I first started out, it was more about getting the necessities done for these rental properties, because I really wasn't making much money. I want to say that it was like maybe 30-some thousand at that time, and living basically paycheck to paycheck. So I didn't have a lot of money to hire a lot of professionals from big name companies. And I didn't have a lot of money. I mean, so I would try to do like my own painting, obviously like the plumbing and electrical, I had to pay somebody. So it was definitely the hard school of knocks, as they would say.
Wow. Okay. So I now have 28 doors. Not all of them are occupied by tenants, because I have kept 2 of the properties that I own, in addition to the house I live in, I've kept for myself so far. And Mark and I use them, to travel. So one is down in Florida in Sarasota, and it's totally been rehabbed. So I could rent that one out, but I haven't, because I kind of like just turnkey living. I can fly down there every 6 weeks or so, and nobody's messed with my stuff. I don't have to worry about, do I need to go in and sanitize and, run all the dishes through the dishwasher, because I don't know who's handled them or how they've, lived in my unit. And so I've just not put that one out there yet, because I have enough other rentals on, that are rented, that I really just don't have to. But it's always an option. I'm an options girl. I'm always have a lot of options in your back pocket. And so I always have the option of renting that one if I should need to, but I haven't needed to yet. And the other one is our most recent purchase, and we haven't even started rehabbing it. And it's down on the Ohio River. And that one we are going to put on VRBO once it is complete, but we're waiting for the neighborhood to catch up. This is one where it's a very depressed area. It's below Athens. So Andora knows the area very well because of her link to the Athens area. This is in Meigs County, very low income. And this community that this house is in is just now starting to get ready to apply for their Main Street grant through the federal government, which will dress up their main street, and it will bring more businesses and a couple of festivals and things into that community. And so it's going to take about 24 months for them to complete their work with the Main Street USA grant program. And so we know that we have that same 24 months that we can work on our property. So with that said, we've decided that we're going to do that one out of pocket. We're not, I actually bought the house with a credit card. Can you believe that? That's how I funded
Love
it.
that.
And again, we're not talking about finding so much, but Andora and it's not only what we do, but it's also a hobby. It's also what we like to do for fun.
Yes.
When we travel, we look for property. When we're not traveling, we look for property.
Yes.
When we're relaxing and our significant others are watching TV, we look for property.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, and I get that. I get her. So because I'm the same way. And I found this one. And again, when we go back to the topic of finding, which we did a couple of months ago, you either want to be the first one on the scene when a property becomes available, or else it'll be gone, or you want to wait and be the last one on the scene when everyone has already looked at it and nobody wants it and it's just hanging out there, this sad little property that the bank does not want on their books, and they are almost giving it away. Well, what you have to remember, if you're going to be the last one on the scene, those are the properties that need the most rehab. So, because that's why nobody else wanted them. So
Mm,
that's why you have to have some of that team, like Andora said, learning to work as a team. You have to have some of those folks in your back pocket, unless you're really, really handy and can do all that work yourself. And over time, and Andora, jump in and tell me what you think about this. Over time, I think you find your sweet spot in finding these properties, and you know what it is you can handle or who you have as a team member, that if it needs that, you're like, oh, I got a guy to do that. So
yes.
I'm good with that. But then there are some things that take a lot of money. You don't always have a team member to do it. You ponder whether you can do it yourself. And so you might steer away from those. And so for me, I'm good if it needs roofs. I'm good if it needs painting. I'm good if it needs carpet. I'm good if it needs appliances. I'm good if it even needs electrical. The part that I always struggle with is if it has foundation issues or if it has underground drainage issues. Those are two of the expensive things. And sometimes I always have trouble finding somebody to handle that for me. Now I'm getting better because after 28 doors, I've run into just about everything over time. And I now have some of those folks on my team that I didn't early on. So early on, if it needed paint, carpet, and appliances, I was good, because I could paint. I could call a carpet company, and then within a day, they could roll out all new carpet or new floor coverings, whatever I chose. And I could call Lowe's and they would deliver appliances and set them in place for me. So I was good if that's all
Okay.
it needed. And so anyway, with this one that we bought down on the Ohio River, it is totally gutted out. We only paid $26,000 for it. It's a 2-story brick right on the Ohio River, and I bought it with a credit card. And Mark and I are going to put this one back together totally by ourselves. It's got good bones, good foundation. It has a brand new metal roof, and it has all new plumbing up to the house from the city. And Mark is handy enough that he is actually going to do all of the wiring, all of the plumbing, all of the drywall. Then I step in and I'm going to design everything and do all of the painting. Then we're going to do all new floor coverings, and finally all new kitchen cabinets and all new appliances. So, but we're going to do it cash out of pocket, cash and carry. We're not going to borrow at all. And so this one, even though it'll take us a few months, will be very inexpensive in the scheme of things. So, Andora, how about you? What is your sweet spot when you find something that is going to need rehab?
So in the beginning, I would pretty much take anything. I literally bought a house in Carroll that was within the same block in which I live, like 3 doors down, and it needed everything. The house was built in the early 1800s. It was a log cabin, and they had put plaster and wallpaper over this log cabin. It needed a furnace. It needed a new electrical system. I mean, it needed everything. And, I was younger then. And so I thought, I can do this. I can just do a little bit at a time. I think I paid like $20,000 for it back in the 90s. And I thought I'll just work on it a little bit at a time. And then, obviously I had to have a professional do electrical, and I would try to find handymans or, people that were handy in the area. So when you are first starting out and you can't afford a big company, I would try, like this, I lived in Carroll. So I would try to find people that were retired, and or maybe their day job was a maintenance guy. Like the guy I had was a maintenance guy at Canal Winchester. And so he knew how to do everything. I was very, very fortunate to find him. So it's really finding that team And kind of when you even buy a house, I think having that person go in with you and say, hey, how much would you charge me for this? Or how much do you think this will cost? Because money was a huge, and it still is. I mean, at the end of the
Mhm.
day,
Oh
we
yeah.
all want to make money on our investments. So it was really finding out, because in the beginning, you don't know how much all these things cost. So when you are
And they cost more than you think.
absolutely, and this one had to have, because it was a an actual log cabin. I mean, the floors had to be torn. I mean, like literally, I gutted the entire side, put all new windows in, hot water tank. I mean, it literally was just a shell of a house, and I had to get a big dumpster, and I went down there and literally started throwing things into the dumpster, and I had that dumpster for a month or so. And it sounds like when you're in your 20s and you don't have a lot of money, I mean, the dumpster cost alone, it was like, oh my gosh, how long am I going to have to keep this here? But it really is working with, and at that time I was single. So, but it really is about trying to build that team and getting expertise on what is needed if you're not, if you don't feel comfortable. But like the big ticket items like your furnace and your roof and your hot water tank and your electric, those are the biggies that
Mhm.
any investor purchasing a house, you definitely need to look at those four things, in my opinion. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to add foundation to that first.
Okay.
I start from the bottom up. The first thing I look at is the foundation. If the foundation is good, then I can continue on. If the foundation is bad, I have a tendency to pass on that, because you don't know how big of a job that could turn into. Maybe it
Absolutely.
just needs a little bit of support, but maybe you need to trench around the entire house and you need to add all these drains. And maybe then the city requires that you tap into their water drain system, at the street. And after a while, that could turn into a huge, huge project. And so I always start with the foundation. If the foundation is good, then I kind of sandwich it. Then I jump to the roof. Is the roof good? Because that means you've got less damage to the structure. Then I start looking at the structure and I go, okay, if the roof is good and the foundation is good, and again, if the roof needs replaced, I'm okay with that because I now have a couple of roofing guys on my team that I know are very fair with their pricing. I've done enough roofs now that I know how to sort that out. And so
Mhm.
once I have the roof done and the foundation is good, the rest is mostly cosmetic. I mean, if it has windows, it has windows. Maybe they need replaced, but maybe you don't have to replace them the first year. Maybe you just want
Absolutely.
to put that on your list that the windows in this house are going to need replaced in the next 5 years. And like Andora, we had this conversation earlier. When I started, I had a tendency to just fix what was broken, so to speak.
Hmm.
I only replaced what needed to be replaced. I only fixed what needed to be fixed, and I got the darn thing rented. And here's my theory on that. If you get it rented, now you can deduct your maintenance cost. If you're rehabbing a house at the very beginning and you haven't rented it yet, all of that is an investment cost. And you can't
Yes.
tax deduct the investment, but you can tax deduct the maintenance. And so I tried to do just what I needed to be done to make it a nice rentable property and then get it rented. And then I could circle back and say, oh, hey, by the way, we're going to give you a new hot water tank because we know that one's, not going to last long. Or, hey, now we're going to replace that furnace. Or
Hmm.
now we're going to replace, and you don't even have to replace all the windows at the same time. Now, oftentimes you can get a great package from a window replacement company. But if not, replace the worst. We just flipped one recently and only one window where they had put a window air unit in and they had it slanted wrong. And so the moisture from the window unit ran down the inside of the wall and it rotted out underneath the
Oh,
window. And the window had rotted as well. And so we just replaced one window, pulled that window out, fixed the wall, put a new, window sill in there and installed a whole new window. But we just did one window in that whole unit. And so over time you can do that. And that's very cost effective. And again, as long as everything looks nice and it's clean and it smells good and it looks
hmm.
good and everything is nice and neat and pretty, your renters will rave about it. Because I don't know about you, but I tell all my students, go out and pretend you're looking for a rental and see what's out there. You will be shocked at what some of these
Mhm.
landlords are putting on the market to rent and for the prices they're putting them out there for. And you will feel very confident that your properties are in good shape once you see what is available on the market. So, Andora, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's looking out there, constantly looking at your market. I use realtor.com, I use Zillow, I use all those things to kind of research what's out there. And of course, like when I first started, the internet wasn't as popular. So I used to drive around and look for sale sign by owner. And then where I had bought in Carroll, I literally had bought like the houses next to me. So it was like a little mini block. It sounds more impressive than what it is to say, oh, I owned the block, but it was just like a corner section. And the houses weren't that much. And I pretty much got the houses that nobody else wanted in
Mhm.
Carroll because one was a hoarder, one was a log cabin, one had foundational problems. And then the one house was the one I was living in that I later turned into a rental. And then another one was just a 1 bedroom, 1 bath house that didn't have any AC and it didn't have a traditional furnace. It literally had a natural gas heater on the wall. And to this day, it still has a natural gas heater. I still use that because the house is so small. So
Mhm.
to do venting and so forth. But I think like the number one thing that really helped me is relationships, right? Like being involved in, back when I was doing this, I didn't really have other people to reach out to. It was more, we don't have what we have today. So I think the number one thing is being connected to these groups and building those relationships by far with existing investors, because they're going to know somebody that's a plumber or somebody that can repair your foundational problems. I wasn't smart enough to realize how extensive buying a house with foundational problems were, and it got fixed, and I still own that house to this day. And then another thing is it had raccoons in it that were in the attic. So that was another unplanned expense. But I mean, I think initially when you're just starting out, it's like making sure, you said something like making sure that it has good bones. Is the location good? You can buy the worst house in the neighborhood if the location's good, right?
Mhm.
So you always want
Absolutely.
to, I mean, I think that's the key. But again, it's just talking to other investors like yourself and saying, hey, if you're in the area, who do you use for your plumber? And like I said, I don't typically go with big name people, but I have gone with big name for like furnaces now, and those larger items and electricians, because you have to make sure for safety precautions that those are things that you're having professionally done. I think, when you're looking at electrical work, changing out an entire electrical system to 220, that's huge.
Well, I
So,
agree because again, the whole permitting process, and I want to talk just briefly about that. A lot of folks try to avoid permits because they're like, oh, I got to buy the permit, and then with the permit comes all the inspections, and then it's going to hold up my project, and the city has to come and inspect it. Well, it's for your safety, and you might say, yeah, but my guy knows what he's doing, so it's going to be safe. Well, it's more than that. It's about your
yes,
liability. If
yes,
something should happen down the road, you want to be able to
absolutely.
say, I did everything by code and it was permitted and it was inspected. And so what it does is it relieves you of the liability of somebody saying that you used some, backwoods electrician that did it wrong. And so it protects your liability down the road. And
Yeah.
those things do happen. I've not had it happen to me. I don't think Andorra has had a major claim like that happen to her, but here just recently, and I don't know, Andor, if you saw this, where that house on Pierce Avenue burned in Lancaster.
Oh, wow. I
Did,
didn't see
did you
that.
see? Anyway,
No.
and a little 3-year-old little girl passed away. They lost, I think, their pets and their 3-year-old in the fire. And my first reaction was note to self
Yes.
is all of the stuff that your house could cause a fire, the electrical, the furnace, the maybe a gas
Hmm.
hot water heater, a gas kitchen stove. Is it anything that I own in any of my units? Are those all up to par?
Yes.
Because I don't want to wake up one morning and discover that one of my properties had a fire and that someone has lost their child
Oh,
or or their pets in a fire that was caused by my house. And so it made me go back and revisit all of that because it can happen. Now, Is it likely? Not likely. When you look around our area, it's not, you don't see fires all over the place, but every time I hear, a fire truck go by, my first
Mhm.
reaction is, oh, I hope everyone is going to be okay. It's not about the property. It's about the liability when you own a lot of properties. You don't want to be the responsible person that caused it, even though it's indirectly. I mean, you literally didn't go down and cause the fire. And
Mhm.
I don't know what they determined was the cause of the fire there. But then since then, I have an ex-client. I used to have salons, and it was one of my nail clients. Her daughter just had a fire in a townhouse more in the Columbus area, and it was caused by the fan in the ceiling in the bathroom. The bathroom exhaust fan
Oh,
caught fire, and a total loss. Now there, no one got hurt, everyone got out, everybody's okay, but the house was a total loss because what the fire didn't damage, the fire trucks with their water hoses damaged
yeah,
because they had to put the fire out. And so the entire townhouse is a total loss. And
yeah.
so now, again, was it the electrician's fault? Was it the manufacturer of the fan's fault? Was it something that the tenant bypassed on their own, trying to maybe, get an extra outlet? I mean, who knows why that wiring caused a fire? But the insurance company will get to the bottom of it and they will determine whose fault that fire was. And that's who's going to be responsible for the cost of that townhouse to rebuild it. And so, again, word to the wise, make sure your insurance is current and paid for. Andora, what about
Absolutely.
that?
Oh, I definitely agree. That's the things that keep me up at night, is always worrying. Safety is huge to me. So that's why like I said, there's certain corners that I will cut, such as, like you said, painting on my own. I'll even attempt flooring, to some degree. Uh, but when it comes to electrical and water, like because a slow water leak can cost you thousands, if it's
Yes.
not properly hooked up correctly. I've experienced that recently. I hate to admit, in a complete rehab that I did, and this is probably one of the more expensive rehabs that I've done. And I had professionals, or so I thought. And when they were leveling the floor, they had removed the toilet and the vanity, and they didn't completely tighten it up underneath the house for the shower and the vanity and the toilet. So all those items leaked, and I'm just now kind of recovering from that. So it's really, and again, these people came highly recommended, and so you can do everything correct and still have these types of issues, and it can
Mhm.
cost you thousands of dollars. And another thing I'm sure you'll talk about is when you're doing these rehabs, that making sure that you, like you said, expect 10% contingency. If not more, if the project's going to cost 4,000, put a 10% contingency on it, especially older homes, which is typically the houses that nobody wants and are least expensive. You really have to. I mean, I had a mold situation. I had bought a duplex, and it had plumbing problems. If you remember that, somehow it wasn't connected. The pipes had been crushed because there was a weeping willow tree in the front of the house. So not only did I have to fix, cut the weeping willow tree down, which is the worst tree ever. If you have one at any of your properties and they are close to a house, I highly recommend eliminating it ASAP.
They're
Um,
beautiful though, and I hate to cut
yes,
down a tree, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
yes. I think they're becoming illegal now, like in
Mhm.
town and so forth, because they are very destructive to a home and their plumbing and all kinds of things. So when I bought this house, I thought, oh, I thought, and this was just 3 years ago that I had purchased this. It was a duplex, really nice stucco home, newer windows. So to look at everything looked pretty good. The furnaces didn't look bad. We had to end up replacing both hot water tanks, and that weeping willow tree cost $750 to take down. And then we get in, everything was completely fixed. And right on New Year's Eve day, we're getting ready to pack up all of our stuff. And we realized the water was coming back in the basement and flooding it. And we were like, we just bought new hot water tanks. So, and then we had to call Chuck Septic System in
Yep.
Columbus. And that's always high. That's another thing. But keep in mind, when it's a holiday or a
Mhm.
weekend, you're going to be paying top dollar. So it's better to get these problems, try to get those resolved during the work week and try to stabilize the property so you don't have to pay that overtime extra pay. That's another thing. But we end up having to hire another company, and don't always just take the first bid because you're desperate. Sometimes you have to, but really try to research it. And we keep, there's one thing I can stress with these rehabs. It's to, when we say build a team, we're talking about get people that you know are your plumbers, your furnace people, your heating and cooling. Have several. Don't just depend on one person. Have several, and then
Because they
also,
might be out on a big job
yeah,
and you can't get them.
yeah, and then also make sure that you are checking with other investors in your area and say, hey, who do you use for this? Like literally, you should have an Excel spreadsheet built that will tell you electrician, heating and cooling, roofer, who can do my handyman. You want to have several handyman type people. When I say handyman, I'm talking about little small things like maybe a threshold into a door, or a very small painting job, or maybe putting one door in. It's very, very difficult to find people, qualified people out there that are willing to do these small jobs, because just to drive to your property and get their tools out, it would typically be maybe 50. They might charge 150 because they're driving there, and they want to make it worth their while, because that kind of comes in the middle of the day and they can only do your job even though it's small, and then they can't get to somebody else. So those are just all considerations, but the biggest tip is get that list built for yourself of all these different individuals and start vetting them with other investors.
And inside the Happy House Hunters, we do have a list of resources like that. So
yes,
I'll just toss that out there. Now, we're somewhat locally organized list because most of us are investing in the Central Ohio area. So our list is kind of Central Ohio. And so now, Andora, I'll toss out a little plus for her. She is one of the co-hosts and admins of the Lady Landlords of Ohio. And we're getting some folks out of Cleveland that are tapping in and asking questions. And I don't have a resource list in Cleveland. I'm starting to develop one, but I don't have a big list up there. And so we're getting some calls, wanting to know, well, who should we get for electrical or plumbing or whatever in Cleveland area. So the more our group grows, the bigger our list will get. But right now, the Happy House Hunters, we're mostly Central Ohio. And of course, now I'm starting to develop some referrals down in Southern Ohio. I have a property in the Hocking Hills area, so I'm getting some referrals for contractors and handymen and plumbers and electricians in the Hocking Hills area. And so the list is growing. But check that out first if you need some help with the list. So, Andora, tell us about you started to tell about your first rehab. Give us a little bit of a background. You said you were single, you bought this first house, it needed everything. What were some of your biggest struggles?
I think just really becoming, when you do have to have electrical and roofing, getting estimates from different contractors and making sure that now we have the internet that's much more prevalent. So when you need to have a roof done, figure out whether you want a 3-tab, which now is becoming uncommon, the 3-tab shingles. It's really understanding, Google it, use AI chat, whatever, to kind of become familiar before you have that contractor come to your door. And I think there's even websites out there that you can say, what's the typical cost of a roof replacement for a house that's 1,500 square foot? Like really kind of research it before you even have that contract. Make sure that they know, like, you don't want to tell them, oh, I don't know anything about this, I'm depending upon you. I mean, have your set of questions for that contractor. And, you want to know when you're hiring somebody, how long do you think it's going to take? What is your start date? Will you be working on my project solely? I've had really bad experiences where, time is money for us, right? We want to get that property very quickly fixed up. If we bought it in May, and as soon as we get those keys in our hand, I mean, clock starts ticking, right? We want to get rented.
Because we're buy and hold investors. So we want to get somebody in there so we start getting some cash flow coming back to help pay for some of these rehabs.
Absolutely. And so time is of the essence. And you really want to vet your contractors well, because I've had situations where contractors won't tell you that they're working 4 other jobs. So they may show up at like 10 or 11, each day, and then only put in 3 or 4 hours. Well, that's that's money out of your pocket every day that something's left undone that you're trying to rehab so you can get it back on the market to rent. That's very, very important and that might even be a whole nother session sometime when and maybe you have it in this one, but vetting your contractors and asking those important questions, and finding out, are you buying the materials? Am I buying the materials? If they buy the materials, sometimes there's a markup on that. If you're buying the materials and you have the receipt, you know exactly what you're getting. And then also making sure that your tools, your drywall, your screws, all that's not getting legs and walking off the job site. It's keeping track of those things. If you're going to do a rehab and you're hiring somebody, you need to be plugged in and communicative with that contractor. I know Kathy, you and I have different styles. I know you're more laid back and you're like, hey, I'm just going to, I'm like, I'll be honest with you. I am probably a micromanager with the contractors because I've had to be. So I'm going over a couple times a week and I want to see what they've got done. And then that's also a good opportunity. If you see errors or flaws, the worst thing you want to do is criticize them, but just to say, hey, you know what, this doesn't really look right. Is it possible maybe to kind of fix this? It looks like this flooring that you're putting down isn't completely butted up. Is there a reason why we've got this 2-inch gap from the wall? I understand we're going to have port around, and it's knowing those things. And again, use AI chat if you're doing a rehab and find out what's the best practices for something as simple as painting. You want them to put the drop cloth. I had so many people on my brand new floors not even using a drop cloth, not cleaning up after themselves. So it's really talking to those contractors and setting expectations for the beginning. Will I be the only one you're working with? What hours do you think that you'll be working here? What can I expect is the turnaround time? And I don't like to pay by the hour because I have a full-time job. So I can't go over there and sit and watch them work. So I'd like to do it by the job. What about you, Kathy? Do you pay by the job?
I like to do it. Yeah, I like to do it by the job too. I like to say, just give me a quote. This is the job. I need you to paint this whole house. Give me the quote on what you're going to charge me. And then again, like you, Andora, it's, do I buy the paint? Do you buy the paint? Because I have an account. I can buy the paint. I have an investor's account at Sherwin-Williams. I don't need their discount to buy the paint just for them to get the discount and then upcharge it to me. I can go buy the paint at their same discount and just provide the paint on the job site for them when they start. And I have one little hack that works really well for me, is that I always give them a shorter deadline than the real deadline.
Oh, that's a good
idea. I never give them the real date. If I have 2 weeks to get a job done, I'll tell them I have to have it done in a week or 10 days. I don't tell them I've got 2 weeks to get it done. I tell them I only have 7 days to get it done or 10 days to get it done instead of 14 days. And that way it gives me a little leverage there in case they do run over. That way they're trying to get across the finish line on the final date. And if they don't quite make it and they run over a few hours or a day or two, I'm still okay. And so that seems to work well for me. So don't anybody tell my secret, because now that the cat is out of the bag, they'll say, oh, now we know.
Yeah. But they'll never really know because if they told you contractually, if you get everything written down, that's another thing too, in my opinion. Over the years, I've had good and bad experience. But the thing I want to stress very, very much so is, if you are hiring a contractor, put it on paper and you both sign it, because you're setting the expectations. Here's what I expect. Here's my start date. Here's my end date. I want, and another huge thing is you want them to clean up every darn day on that job site. I do, because I want it clean. And also I had a painter one time that was taking my paint that I purchased every day with him. And I'm like, I don't know why he's doing that. Well, it's because he started kind of like showing up here and there, wasn't consistently showing up. And I suspect he felt if he left the paint behind, that I would get somebody else in there, or that I would kind of, get in there, jump in there and do it. So it's just all these things, these little nuances that you really want to set those expectations. And, and would you agree? No,
I do agree. And inside the Happy House Hunters group, we have all of those forms. There's scope of work forms. There's, project estimate forms. All those forms are inside the Happy House Hunters course inside the academy. So just so you know, if you're a member of the academy, you have access to all that.
Yeah. And I think another thing to be really make sure that you don't have scope change. So again, if you have all this written down, this is what I expect A, B, and C, and then later on you notice that something's not getting done that you thought or assumed, you definitely need to contact the contractor, go back to your lease is, or not your lease, I'm sorry, your contract, and let them know, hey, I thought you were going to do this, this, and this. Did I misunderstand? Because the worst thing that you can do is upset your contractor when they're currently working on your project, and then they just kind of leave, and then they leave you in a mess, because sometimes it's hard to find another contractor that wants to pick up somebody else's mess. And sometimes they take the supplies that you purchased. I mean, unfortunately, these are some of the things that people don't talk about that definitely happen, where they get upset and they just take your things. And that's kind of one of the negatives about not hiring a well-known company, is sometimes when you get somebody off the street or just a handyman that's just kind of self-employed, that's sometimes some of the struggles that you're going to have. But again, I still like to use a combination of both. But in the beginning, like I said, I pretty much used a lot of handyman types, and just the big things like the ticket items, again, for the furnaces and the hot water tanks. I would use somebody that was like a handyman if I felt that they had guaranteed work. So you're going to want to check with other people to say, hey, do you have any other jobs that you've done? Is there any referrals that you can provide me? Do you have photos? And so usually anybody that has photos and referrals, you can call the person, hey, did they get the job done on time? Did they keep the job site clean? And I know this sounds silly, but I don't want a bunch of contractors on my job site that are smoking cigarettes and just throwing them in the grass. I mean, I know that sounds petty, but that, to me, that's litter. That's something that you're going to have to pick up. So, I've had experiences like that where someone's a heavy smoker, or, you won't allow smoking in your house, and they're working with a cigarette dangling out of their mouth. I mean, have you ever had that happen to you, Kathy, where?
No, but again, I try to build relationships with the folks that I'm using. And so like Andora, early on when I first started, and I'm just going to tell briefly about my very first one. I had gotten into the salon business and decided to buy my first salon building. So that was my very first one. And I'm not going to describe that one as my first one, though, because it was a commercial rehab. And most of us on this call are not going to be doing commercial rehabs. We're going to be doing more residential rehabs. So I'm going to skip over that one to my very first residential rehab. And what I did is, again, it was all about networking. And I met a girl, and she just said, hey, what is it you do? Blah, blah. You know how it is when you network.
Oh, yeah.
And I told her, I'm just now getting into the real estate investing. And she was like, oh, she goes, I have a brother-in-law that had worked for the gas company for years. And she said, and he's kind of handy. And she said, he's worried that now he's not going to have, pocket change, and he's going to be bored. She said, it would be right up his alley. I should connect you to. She did. His name is Kent, and he worked for me and with me for the next like 20 years. And
Wow.
he did a lot of our painting. And he was that all around handyman. He could like fix an electrical outlet. He could hang a new light. He could fix a doorknob that wasn't working. He could hang a door if I needed one. He could even replace one window. Now, he wasn't going to build a house. He wasn't going to go in like a full construction company and rehab a whole property. And he just worked for me project by project. And I could say, okay, I bought this house and it needs painted. And he would go, okay. Or I
Yeah.
just bought this house and it needs all new fixtures in the bathroom. And he would be, okay. And
Yeah.
so anyway, he worked with me like that. And he was very inexpensive. He was retired from the gas company. He was an older guy. He was very dependable. And he and I worked around each other, and I did cater to his needs. He'd say, hey, I've got to take my grandson, whatever. I'd say, sure, no problem. And we worked very well together because we built that relationship. And so it was more, we just had dinner with him the other day. It's more than just a work relationship. We became good friends. And and the other day his mother had since passed, and he had all of this gorgeous cherry furniture of hers. And we bought the whole storage unit of cherry furniture, and it's going to go in that Ohio River property when we're done. And so we've got it in, we now have it in storage in Mark's hangar. But it's beautiful cherry furniture that you can't buy today. We got the whole storage unit for like $600.
Oh, wow. Now that's a deal, but it's about
That's a deal.
relationships.
Because
It's about relationships.
he needed to liquidate it and get rid of it. And again, it was his mom's. And so he called us and he said, I thought of your Ohio River property. He said, it fits the era. I know you want to do that as a VRBO. So you see how relationships just work together like that. And it just worked out. We took one look at it and said, oh yes, we want it. We'll never find that quality of furniture for that price. And so we actually have a whole living room grouping and 2-bedroom groupings and a dining room table out of a $600 purchase out of his storage unit. And so now he gets to take his next best step, and we now are ready for our next best step. So my first one, I went out and I wanted to buy a duplex because, you know, you always hear in the investment world, you know, oh, get a duplex. Now, I didn't want to live in one unit and rent the other. I wanted to do both as an investment. And so I hadn't gotten pre-approved yet or anything. I just was looking because I had not done this before. I was exactly where Deepak is today. I had the house I was living in, but I didn't have an investment property. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was just looking. So I'm on the MLS, I'm looking around, and I see this duplex in Lancaster. It was a top and bottom duplex, and it was on the market for $62,000. And on the MLS. And I was concerned. Now, this has been many, many years ago. I was concerned because at that time, a duplex would have gone for about 120, give or take, depending on the size and the part of town. This one was 62. So I said, what is wrong with this house? Sure. Something's wrong with it that it's on the market for 62. So long story short, we look at it, can't find a darn thing wrong with it. We tell the realtor that we want to go ahead and go into contract on the 62. And she says, oh, you just missed it. She said, a young couple has just gone into contract for this. They're going to live in one unit and rent the other. And she said, so, and I said, well, then I want to do a backup. And she goes, no, you don't. Because she said, if you do a backup, she says, then when I do find you, because now she was like, oh, I'm your realtor now. You know, she says, when I do find you another duplex, you know, for 120, because that's what they were going for. She says, you're going to have to hang out with this one because you've got a backup contract. And I thought, I don't want to spend 120, which I already knew that. See, this is where I did my homework. I already knew that's what else was on the market. And she was going to try, and I say this loosely, she was going to try to twist my arm into going into contract on one of those. And I said, nope, I want to do a backup on this one for 62. And she was like, okay. So she put it in contract, backup contract. Like a week goes by and she calls me and she goes, guess what? You're in contract. And I said, what happened? And she said, their deal fell through and we don't know why. So now Mark and I are concerned. We're like, okay, we originally thought something was wrong with this house. We put a backup on it. Now we're in contract for it for 62. What is really wrong with this house? So we're just driving around and we went in the alley in the back and we're looking at this house and we're looking at this house. We'd already been through it. Inside, it did not need painted. It did not need new floor coverings. It did not need new appliances. It did not everything. All you had to do was put a for rent sign out front. And we're like, what is wrong with this house? And all of a sudden we were sitting in the back alley, just looking up through the backyard at this house. And we kept saying, we're missing something. Why would this seller not put it on the market for 120? That's what they were going for. And all of a sudden I said, I see it. And Mark said, what is it that you see? This house is huge, big 2-story house. And the top of it was all slate, which is very heavy, slate roofs. But a slate roof, and again, that's another whole conversation, but a slate roof can last 100 years the first time. And once you patch it up and replace a few slate, it can last another 100 years. So don't let anybody talk you into tearing off a slate roof just because it's slate. However, this one was when they built the house in the early 1900s. They had a walk-up staircase into the attic and it had dormers. Does everybody know what a dormer is? Where the roof has a little window that juts out from the main roof. It had dormers all 4 directions on the top end of that house. And at that time, they did not build, because we had been in the attic, and there were no supports where the center of that slate roof, where all 4 of those dormers shot out, it was just like a little square center. There were no support posts under those corner centerpieces. And the entire top of that house, are you ready? Had done this. The entire top of that house had sunk in, and the dormers were like shooting upwards and outward. And we looked at that and I said, okay, we're already in contract. We bet, and we just only suspected, we don't know this for a fact, that when that young couple who was probably trying to buy it on an FHA applied for their loan, they had to have an inspection. And the inspector probably said, that house is going to need a whole new top end. You're going to have to tear that off, down the whole roof, down to the ceiling level of that top floor, and put a whole new roof with, rafters and everything. I mean, we're not talking just shingling a new roof. We're talking about tearing off the whole top end of that house and rebuilding it. Well, by that time, we had a closing date, and we went in with no inspections, no contingencies, cash deal. So all of a sudden, we've got a closing date, and we're expected to show up with $62,000. So we did. We bought the house. So then I turned to Mark and I said, okay, deep breath. This is my first one. I'm now in the soup. How do I fix this? And Mark says, well, let me think about it. And this is his superpower. So he goes in, we go into that walk-up attic, we look at that roof, he builds with 2x4s a square, like he's building a wall. And he puts a wall under each section of that center that had sunk down. He put an actual wall as a support. Then he made like a scissor lift, if you can picture that, within that wall. And then he put a come along on it with a crank, and he built that scissor lift. And every week before we would go out to dinner, he would go over and crank it and raise up that wall. Then the next week we would go over and he would raise up that wall. Then the next week we would go over and he would raise up that wall. And we did that for about 8 weeks. And now that roof is straight.
Wow.
And then we just left all of that there. We put a lock on the door that goes to the walk-up attic. And we said, that's owners only. We don't let any of the tenants up there because, again, there is a lot of pressure on that scissor lift up there. And we didn't want kids swinging on it or playing on it or making that their playroom. So we just locked that off from the tenants. We said, you can't store anything up there, because if that would get bumped out, that's a lot of pressure. And so that scissor lift is in that house to this day. And that's the oldest house, not oldest as in the year of the house. That's the earliest investment property that I bought. And the scissor lift is still there. He goes and puts a level on it about once a year just to make sure that it's still holding and in place. Every so often he'll tweak it a little bit and give it another crank or two to keep it level. We had a slate roof company then come out, and they went all over that roof and made sure they patched and repaired anything that was cracked or broken or that might cause a leak. And at the end of the day, our slate roof guy was the one that told us this. He said, if you can stabilize that roof, your renters don't care if it's a little crooked. He said all they care about is that the bathroom's clean and that the sink works and that the floor coverings are nice and good countertops. He said they don't care if that roof is a little crooked. And he said, and the fact that you guys couldn't find it when you were looking for it, he said most people will never see it because they're not looking. They're not even looking for that. So this makes an amazing investment. Now, here was the question when we're talking about investments. Oh, what happens if we need to sell it? Will someone else who puts a contract on it, will they not be able to get a loan? Because again, maybe another inspector might say that whole top end needs replaced. But what I know today that I didn't know then is that there are thousands of investors out there that would give cash for that deal in a heartbeat, because like us, they don't care if the roof is a little bit crooked because they're never going to live there. It's going to be an investment property for them, and they're buy and hold investors, and they're more interested in the cash flow out of that property. That has been one of my biggest cash flowing properties because I paid that off in 20 years. I now only owe taxes and insurance each month, and it's 100% cash flowing on the rent over and beyond whatever the taxes and insurance cost me, which is minimal in Lancaster. And so that has become one of my biggest cash flowing properties. And that was the entire fix.
Yeah.
So Andora, how did yours turn out? Your very first one?
So my very first one I still own to this very day. It's still in Carroll, and that's the one where again, I had the one in Athens we ended up selling because usually when you have three people, especially siblings, that's difficult. And that house is still well, but we sold that in the 90s. And then, like I said, I bought my own house in Carroll, which is now rental. I did sell that one, but the one that was the log cabin, I ended up keeping that and I still have that in it. Like right now, today, that was the text that I just got is it has a roof leak, but I've had it since the 90s, like 94 or something like that. So, you have to plan for these things, these roof replacements and repairs. So it turned out well. And I mean, that, like I said, I bought it for 20,000 and put all new windows in it, hot water tank, all this kind of stuff, and it's turned out really well. And it's one of my better money makers for sure. But I think I like the idea of buying properties that are in distress when you are starting out, unless you're independently wealthy, but I think that's
well,
really
or if you have absolutely zero skill set and you have a zero skill set and you don't have that team put together yet. Sometimes,
yes,
and again, depending on your age, not necessarily the
yes,
age of the property, but depending on your age, you could buy something that's a little closer. I mean, like, here's what you buy it for, here's what your payoff is. Well,
yes,
as you're paying down and as the house is appreciating, that is going to become a better deal over time. So maybe it's okay that you're breaking even the first year or two. Maybe
yeah,
that's okay if you're just now getting into investing. And again, I'm not one to say, oh, it has to make so much a month. Now I know what I prefer. And the longer I'm in the properties and the more I can pay them off, the more, it goes up in appreciation, goes down in my payments. Next thing I've got all kinds of equity. And as the rents go up, now not only does the property, is it worth more, but now I'm even getting more cash flow because I'm getting higher rents. And so it's all about where you are in your investing journey.
I
And
would
for
agree
marketing,
with that.
a lot of people ask us, they go, well, what do you have to have? And I said, well, because we're now retired, if I buy something today, I want it to cash flow. I don't want it to cash flow 30 years from now because
Absolutely.
I'm too old for that.
No,
I'll be 100.
no, I'm the same way. As well, but even I'm still working, but I am the retirement age. So for me, I also have a thing, you'll hear the term called buy box. And a buy box is simply, where is it that you want your property to be located? Do you want a commercial or is it residential? What is it? What's your buy box? I like to buy properties that are within 30 minutes of my house. Now, we did own a short-term rental in St. Petersburg, Florida from 2004 for like 8 years to 2021. And it was great and I enjoyed it. But that's really when you have to pin boots on the ground and really get that team if you're not handy. So my buy box, like I said, here is 30 minutes within Pickerington. So that's what I really like because I know that I can look at the property, put my, boots on the ground, look at it. Because I'm not a big, I don't have like 28 like you do. I only have 14. And one of those is our home, and then the other is one that we're trying to sell right now. And it was an actual flip, and it just hasn't gone with this economy. So you have to kind of plan for those
Yeah.
things. If you buy a house with the intention of flipping, you better make sure that there's the market for it and not to let your costs exceed, when you're doing these flips, exceed it. Don't over improve it so much that no, it's going to not, you're not going to be able to get your money back. And I don't feel that we did that with this flip. I really contributed to the economy right now and this presidential election, people not knowing
Well,
whether interest rates are going to go down.
things always happen right around an election like this. Things always
Yes.
kind of take a standstill and start to do a little bit of a nosedive because of the uncertainty. So I think once you get on the other side of the election, I think however it goes, things are going to loosen up. And again, that's just the trend that's always happened around election cycles. And so you just kind of have to have that big picture going into it. So I don't think you over improve that one either. I love where it is. I love everything about it. And again, just remember, if you are flipping one, you know, rehabbing it to resell, you only need one buyer. You don't need 20.
Exactly.
You only
Yeah,
need one that loves it. Yeah.
that's true.
That wants to be in that, again, location, location, location. You're going to have a buyer that says, that's exactly where I want to be. And this one's all done and move in ready, and I'm going for it. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And
So I
here's the
think,
way I look at it. If this somehow won't sell at this point in time, I also do midterms. So I'll make it into a midterm, which for those of you who aren't familiar with the midterm, it's just rather than having it as a long-term investment where you're renting out for 12 months, it's you're furnishing it and renting it out 30 days or greater. So, and I know
and
Kathy,
that is
you've got midterms.
yes, I have midterms as well. And that's a good point. I have commercial and I have residential. In my residential, I have long-term, midterm, and short-term. So I'm pretty well diversified. And again, I always say, make sure you have options. Again, I'm the options girl. Make sure you have
Yes.
some options. And so Andora made a great point there. If that one doesn't sell, she doesn't have to sacrifice her purchase price and come down. She can just use that as a midterm rental for a while. And we in the business, we lovingly call that a long flip.
Yes. A
Where you
long
rent it
flip.
for a while and then you sell it. And so she has options. You know, she has
Wow.
options. So she's not stuck with a property that she can't move. And worst case scenario, she can always long-term rent that one because the building that she's in allows long-term rentals. And
Yes.
so she definitely has options as her exit strategy, however she decides to exit that flip. So I love that. We're just a few minutes over our hour. Any questions from Sherry or Adrian? And Adrian, thank you. I saw you came in late. Deepak had another call, so he had to jump off. He was doing this on his lunch hour. He had to go back to work. And so he had to jump on another meeting for his work. Any questions from Sherry or Adrian?
All right.
Well, I see Adrian unmuted there.
Oh,
Hi, Adrian. Can you hear us okay? We don't hear you yet. Yeah, I see he unmuted, but I don't hear him.
yeah. I think he might have connection issues. I'm getting pinged by my roofer, so I apologize. I may have to. He's
Yep.
actually at the property now, the one I was referring to. So I
Okay.
may have to. But thank you so much for having me on here.
And
It was a
Dora,
pleasure.
thank you. I love tag teaming the call with you. We have to do this again sometime.
Again.
Anybody that's had any questions, just tap into KathyBenner.com. If you want to talk to Andora, I can hook you up. So just let us know. And again, thank you so much for joining in today. And we'll see
Thanks.
everyone next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. See ya. Bye.